The sterile white glow of the laboratory burned into Tyra's eyes. A light too harsh, too deliberate, meant to expose every flaw, every tremor of fear. Her sapphire skin glistened with sweat, and the cool air carried the antiseptic tan of chemicals that clung to her throat. Restraints dug into her wrists and ankles, cold metal biting hard enough to draw thin trickles of purple blood that traced down her arms. She pulled against them once more, the sound of rattling bolts echoing in the otherwise clinical silence. The chair was immovable, engineered not for comfort, but control. "Please," she whispered, voice hoarse from hours of begging. "I am Tyra Valen, daughter of the Astral Council. My people will pay any ransom you demand. Release me, and you will be compensated." The words were delivered with the calm cadence of a diplomat, honed through years of treaties and negotiations. Even now, stripped of dignity, she clung to the tools she knew best reason: compromise, persuasion. The Vexoid scientist didn't look at her. He stood hunched over a console, his gray, wrinkled skin folding in heavy ridges down his neck. His long, spindly fingers danced across glowing dials with the precision of ritual. "Specimens don't speak," he said flatly, voice devoid of interest. "Your genetic composition is far too valuable to be wasted on ransom. The consortium has invested heavily in this program. You will serve." The word specimen cut deeper than the restraints. Her heart pounded, each beat a hammer, striking against her ribs. Her people, the lions, were known for their rare adaptability, a genetic flexibility that allowed them to bridge across species where others failed. Diplomacy was in their bones, compatibility in their blood. And now that gift was being twisted, stolen, and weaponized. The hiss of a door opening drew her eyes to the far side of the chamber. Heavy footsteps followed, each thud reverberating through the sterile floor until he appeared, a drawn male. He was massive, towering nearly 8 feet, scaled skin shifting between mottled green and brown. His reptilian eyes locked on her, devoid of compassion, only instinct and purpose. "Is the specimen prepared?" His voice rumbled, low and rough like stone grinding against stone. "Almost," the Vexoid replied. He adjusted another dial, not sparing Tyra a glance. "The sedative will take effect momentarily. She will remain conscious but compliant." Her stomach turned cold. This couldn't be happening. Not here, not like this. She had stood before the Galactic Assembly, spoken words that had diffused wars, soothed rivalries, bound civilizations together. Yet in this room, under this sterile light, she was stripped of every achievement, reduced to little more than flesh and biology. Tears stung her eyes, but she fought them back, biting down until she tasted blood on her lip. "You don't have to do this," she tried again, her voice cracking. My council, will retaliate. Release me, and you may yet escape punishment." The Dran gave a guttural laugh, a sound that made her skin crawl. "The council's reach does not extend here. You are far from their power." From above, a mechanical arm stirred to life. Metal joints clicked as it descended, slow and deliberate. At its tip gleamed a syringe of pale blue liquid, catching the sterile light in its surface. The needle shimmered, a silver fang poised to bite into her flesh. "No." Tyra thrashed, muscles straining until fire burned in her shoulders. The chair rattled against its bolts, the cuffs cutting deeper into her wrists. "Don't do this." Her cries echoed across the chamber, swallowed by the clinical hum of machines. The Dran moved closer, his scaled chest rising with deep breaths, anticipation written across his features. The Vexoid murmured calmly, "Resist all you wish. The program does not fail. You will submit, as all specimens do." The syringe lowered inch by inch until she could feel the cold kiss of metal against the tender skin of her neck. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. This was it, the end of her freedom, The end of Tyra the diplomat, Tyra the bridge builder, Tyra the woman. She would become nothing but a vessel. Her mind screamed, but the words never came. The world narrowed to the gleam of the needle and the weight of despair pressing her into the chair. Then, with a sound like the heavens themselves tearing open, the wall behind her exploded inward. The sterile perfection of the laboratory shattered in a shower of metal and fire. Sirens blared, drowning out the scientist's startled cry. Dust filled the air as the white light turned red with alarms. Through the chaos, through the smoke and ruin, a figure stepped forward. Smaller than the Dryan, but moving with a lethal purpose. Armored in scarred gray plating, rifle raised and eyes burning with focus. A human dot, and with his arrival, everything changed. The acrid smoke curled in the air, mixing with the sterile tang of antiseptic and burning circuitry. Tyra coughed against the restraints, eyes watering as she tried to focus on the silhouette emerging. Through the haze, the figure moved with precision, each step measured, heavy boots crunching debris underfoot. A flash of red emergency light revealed more battered gray combat armor, its surface scarred from countless battles. The man's face was obscured by tactical goggles, but the hard line of his jaw and the dark stubble along his chin marked him as human. For an instant, Tyra wondered if the smoke was playing tricks on her. A human? Here? The idea was absurd. Humans were brash explorers, yes, but rarely seen on the fringes where consortium power stretched its claws deepest. Yet the way he carried himself, the easy readiness of his weapon, the confidence in his stride spoke of a man not out of place, but exactly where he intended to be. The Vexoid scientist shrieked, spindly fingers darting across his console. His voice cracked, more shrill than commanding. Intruder! Seal the rifle barked, the sound thunderous in the enclosed space. One bolt, precise, punched through the scientist's chest. His words cut off in a gurgle as he collapsed, gray folds of skin crumpling against the floor, purple ichor spreading in a slow pool beneath him. The drone roared, a sound that rattled the lab's metal walls. He lunged forward, scales flashing under the pulsing red lights, claws extended to rend the smaller opponent. The human didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he dropped the rifle, hand already pulling a knife from his belt. The blade gleamed briefly, then blurred as he sidestepped the Dran's charge. Tyra's breath caught. The Dran was a mountain of muscle and fury, yet the human moved like water around stone, flowing past him, striking once, twice. A spray of green blood misted the air. The Dran stumbled, gargled a final growl, then collapsed in a twitching. Heaped out for a heartbeat, silence reclaimed the room, broken only by the wailing alarms. Tyra's chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. She stared at the human, every nerve in her body coiled tight between fear and desperate hope. He wiped the blade clean on the Dran's scaled hide, then slid it back into its sheath. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his empty hands in her direction, palms open. His voice, when it came, was low and steady, surprisingly gentle. Easy. I'm not here to hurt you. Her throat worked around dry words. Who are you? He stepped closer, boots crunching glass from shattered panels. His gloved hands moved to the restraints, assessing the locks with quick, practiced eyes. Name's Eric Donovan, he said, tone clipped but calm. Independent contractor. You could say I'm a problem solver. Metal clicked as her right wrist came free. Blood rushed back into her hand, sending a fiery sting up her arm. She winced but didn't look away from him. You're human, she breathed, disbelief heavy in her voice. Last time I checked. His mouth quirked into the ghost of a smile, though his eyes stayed sharp, alert, already scanning the shadows beyond the dust and flickering lights. He freed her left wrist, then crouched to undo the ankle restraints. "Now, let's get you moving. This place is about to be crawling with security." Her legs trembled as the last cuff fell away, but she forced herself upright. The chair rattled behind her as she stumbled forward, unsteady. Eric's arm came up, catching her briefly before he let go. "Why?" she whispered, eyes wide, searching his face. "Why risk your life for a lion? For me?" He slung his rifle back over his shoulder, fingers tightening briefly on the strap. "I was hired to retrieve stolen research data. Finding you wasn't part of the plan." His gaze flicked to the dead scientist. "But I don't walk away from things like this. Some lines you don't cross." Her chest ached at the simple conviction in his words. For the first time since her capture, she felt something other than despair. It was fragile, fleeting, but it shimmered in her veins nonetheless. Hope. Eric checked the corridor beyond the gaping hole in the wall. Alarms echoed down its length, heavy boots already pounding somewhere in the distance. He glanced back at her, jaw tightening. "Stay close. Do exactly what I say, when I say it." Tyra nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "Got it." He gave one sharp nod in return, then raised his rifle, its muzzle gleaming in the blood-red light. Together, they stepped into the chaos beyond, into a storm of alarms and steel, running toward freedom with the weight of an entire consortium. Facility poised to crush them. The corridor beyond the shattered wall pulsed crimson with emergency lights. The sterile hum of the laboratory, replaced by wailing klaxons that shook the metal walls. Smoke drifted through the passage like a living thing, curling around pipes and venting panels. Tyra pressed close to Eric's back, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor as he moved with sharp, controlled steps. Every few paces he raised, his rifle checking corners, his movements instinctively fluid, like muscle memory carved by years of combat. The alarms reverberated in Tyra's chest, each note a reminder that the facility was alive, aware, and closing in. She wrapped her arms around herself beneath the rough fabric of the cloak Eric had torn from the wreckage, but it was a thin comfort against the weight of dread. She should have been paralyzed with fear. Yet there was something about the humans. Presence calm, decisive, that held her together. They reached an intersection. Eric raised his fist in a silent command. Tyra froze. The pounding of boots echoed faintly from the left-hand corridor-heavy, deliberate, multiple individuals in formation. Tyra's heart jumped. Her mind conjured images of armored guards, faceless enforcers of the consortium, closing in on them like a steel trap. Eric knelt, his hand dipping into a pouch at his hip. When it emerged, it held a small metallic sphere, no larger than a fruit. He thumbed the switch, and the device emitted a faint hum. Without hesitation, he rolled it down the left-hand passage. "Close your eyes," he murmured. Tyra obeyed instinctively, clapping her hands over her ears. A split second later, the world erupted in light and sound. Even through her lids, a white-hot brilliance seared her vision, followed by a thunderclap that rattled her bones. Shouts rang out, pained and confused. "Now," Eric snapped. His hand closed around hers, strong and urgent, pulling her into motion. They bolted down the opposite corridor. Tyra's legs protested, weak from days of restraint, but adrenaline forced them forward. Behind her, she heard the clatter of weapons hitting the floor, the muffled groans of blinded guards. Eric's gambit had bought them precious seconds. Corridors twisted in a maze of steel and shadow. Twice, Eric shoved her into alcoves or side rooms, holding her back with an arm across her chest as patrols thundered past. In one room, Tyra's stomach turned as her eyes fell on a familiar shape. Another restraint chair, identical to the one she'd just escaped. Beside it lay surgical instruments, cold and gleaming under flickering light. "They're doing this." "To others," she whispered, voice shaking. The weight of it sank into her. She was not alone in her suffering. There were more victims, more lives reduced to specimens. Eric's gaze flicked to her, sharp but steady. Focus, we can't help them if we're dead. His words struck her like a slap, but she understood. Swallowing her despair, she forced herself back into the moment, into survival. They pressed on. The automated voice of the facility's AI cut through the alarms, cold and emotionless. Security breach in Sector 7. All personnel initiate. Containment protocol. Repeat. Sector 7 compromised. That's us, Eric muttered grimly, his grip on his rifle tightening. They rounded another corner and froze. Ahead, 2 guards loomed. Massive Taurian brutes with ridged foreheads and thick armor plating along their forearms. Energy weapons gleamed in their hands. One snarled. Target sighted. Tyra barely had time to gasp before Eric moved. He ducked. Under the first guard's swing, sliding inside the alien's reach. His knife flashed, burying deep into the gap between chest plates. The guard bellowed, staggering backward as Eric twisted the blade. The second Taurian raised his weapon. Tyra's eyes darted desperately, landing on a metal tray on a nearby cart. Acting on instinct, she grabbed it and hurled it with all the strength her trembling arms could muster. The tray struck the guard across the face with a resonant clang. His shot went wild, blasting a hole in the ceiling and showering them with sparks. Eric finished the first guard with a brutal twist and withdrawal of his blade, then spun to fire 2 quick shots from his sidearm. The second Taurian staggered back, a dark pool spreading beneath him as he fell. Breathing hard, Eric glanced at Tyra. A ghost of a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Nice throw. Tyra blinked at her trembling hands, shocked at her own. Actions. I played disc sport. At the academy, she managed, breathless. Eric's grin deepened, just for a heartbeat. Remind me not to challenge you. The lightness vanished almost as quickly as it appeared. He wiped the blade against his armor and checked the corridor ahead. Hangar bays 2 levels down. That's our way out. Tyra steadied herself against the wall, adrenaline still buzzing in her veins. The alarm screamed, smoke thickened, and the facility shook with the weight of reinforcements closing in. For the first time since her capture, she wasn't just waiting for death or violation. She was running, fighting Dot, and at her side, a human stranger who cut through monsters like they were nothing, who risked everything for reasons she still didn't understand. She swallowed hard, forcing strength into her trembling legs. Then let's get to that hangar. Eric nodded once, sharp and resolute, then motioned her forward. Together, they disappeared into the pulsing red corridors, with the weight of the consortium pressing down on them from all sides. The stairwell vibrated with the sound of boots pounding above them, a chorus of metal on metal that echoed down into the darkness. Eric pushed through the final landing door with his shoulder, rifle up and ready. Tyra stumbled after him, breath ragged, her legs screaming from exertion. But adrenaline kept her moving. The hangar stretched out before them, a cavernous expanse of steel and light. Red emergency strobes cast everything in a feverish glow rows of sleek ships, stacked cargo containers, and scaffolding that reached toward the ceiling like skeletal fingers. And there, waiting near the far side, was their salvation. A compact, angular craft with a bold crimson stripe along its hull, ramp lowered like a tongue inviting them in. Eric drew in a sharp breath through his teeth. 6 guards in full armor waited in a loose half-circle between them and the ship, weapons raised, eyes glittering through visor slits. Their stance was disciplined. This wasn't a ragtag patrol. They were here for him. Standard formation? Eric muttered, scanning their arrangement. They're expecting us. Tyra's chest tightened. Can we find another way? He shook his head. No time. They'll lock down the bay any second. Only way out is through. She swallowed, forcing down the terror bubbling in her chest. Then tell me what to do. Eric reached into a pouch, producing 2 small discs, flat and dark. He pressed one into her trembling hand. When I throw mine, cover your ears, shut your eyes. Count to 3, then run for that ship with the stripe. Don't stop. Don't. Look back, understand? Her fingers closed around the device, cool and alien in her palm. She nodded. Understood. Eric gave her one final look steady, grounding before stepping forward. Then, with the motion of a man who had done this 100 times before, he hurled his disc high and hard into the center of the guard's formation. He threw his second low, skittering it across the polished floor. The discs clattered, then detonated in tandem. The world became light. Blinding, searing, omnipresent. Tyra squeezed her eyes shut, hands pressed tight against her ears as the double concussion slammed into her chest. The floor vibrated beneath her feet, a ripple of raw force radiating outward. 1, 2, 3. She ran. The hangar blurred, smoke and shadows melding together as her bare feet slapped against the steel. Sparks rained down from ruptured light fixtures. She glimpsed shapes in the haze guards reeling, weapons clattering from stunned hands, helmets jerked back in agony. Then Eric was there, firing short, sharp bursts as he moved beside her, each shot clean and deliberate. One guard fell, then another, the staccato rhythm of his weapon, almost musical amid the chaos. A bolt of plasma hissed past Tara's shoulder, close enough that the heat singed the air. She yelped, but didn't falter. The ramp was ahead now 20 meters 15. Eric surged forward, rifle spitting fire. Tyra's lungs burned, her vision narrowing to that one strip of crimson-painted hull. She stumbled once, knees threatening to buckle, but Eric's arm wrapped around her waist and hauled her upright without slowing. 10 meters. 5. They hit the ramp together, Tyra collapsing to her hands and knees as Eric pivoted at the threshold, unleashing covering fire in rapid, precise bursts. Guards scrambled to regroup, but their formation was broken, confusion reigning in the haze. Go, he barked, slamming his palm against the control pad. The ramp whined, lifting beneath their feet. Tyra scrambled up into the narrow corridor of the ship, heart hammering. Eric backed in after her, rifle still raised, firing until the last possible second before the ramp sealed shut with a thunderous clang. Cockpit, second seat, he ordered, voice rough with exertion. Tyra staggered forward down the dimly lit passage. The cockpit was small, but bristling with consoles, every surface alive with blinking lights and switches. She collapsed into the co-pilot's chair, hands clutching the armrests. Eric dropped into the pilot's seat, fingers moving with impossible speed over the controls. Engines roared to life, a deep vibration thrumming through the hull. Warning klaxons blared louder, echoing from speakers across the bay. Hang on, he muttered, eyes locked forward. This is going to be rough. The ship lifted, hovering for a fraction of a second before Eric slammed the throttle forward. They shot across the hangar like a cannonball, smashing through the residual smoke. Tyra's body slammed back against her seat, breath torn from her lungs. Through the viewport, the massive ring of the consortium facility filled her vision. Harsh lines, metal and menace, orbiting the barren rock of a moon below. Then smaller shapes detached from its sleek fighters angling toward them, predatory and precise. They're launching interceptors, Eric said, jaw tight. His hands twisted the yoke, sending the ship into a sharp dive. Energy bolts flashed past, painting streaks of blue light across the void. Tyra gripped the seat until her knuckles turned white. Can we outrun them? A grim smile flickered across Eric's face. We can do better than that. The ship bucked as a plasma shot, clipped their rear shields, warning lights flaring across the console. Eric flipped a series of toggles overhead, calm in the storm. See that red button on your right? When I say now, press it and hold. Tyra's hand hovered over the switch, her breath coming fast. What will it do? Eric's eyes stayed on the viewport, tracking the weaving fighters. Level the playing field. The ship rocked again, alarms blaring, enemy fire closing in. Eric's voice cut through it, sharp and commanding. Now. Tira slammed her palm on the button. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a series of brilliant flashes erupted. Behind them, spheres of magnetic distortion, blossoming like silent fireworks. The pursuing fighters shuddered mid-flight, systems glitching, engines faltering as the mines ripped through their electronics. Eric's grin was sharp, almost feral. Pulse mines. Not military issue. Bought them off the back of a freighter. Tyra stared as the fighters spun, helpless in space. For the first time since her nightmare began, she felt the surge of possibility, that freedom, that the stars stretched into white lines as Eric pulled the lever, and the ship leapt into hyperspace, leaving the consortium's steel cage behind. The stars outside the viewport had long since shifted from streaks to the calm shimmer of normal space when the mining world of Helios Minor came into view. A copper-colored sphere scarred by centuries of excavation, its surface was littered with vast crater pits and winding scars where machines had torn at its crust. Around its equator, rings of habitat domes and jagged towers glowed faintly, a spaceport clinging to survival on the edge of consortium territory. Tira leaned forward in her chair, silver-white hair falling loose around her face as she studied the battered world. This is where we hide? Eric's hands rested lightly on the controls, his posture deceptively relaxed, though his eyes never left the monitors. Not hide. Regroup. I've got a friend down there. If anyone can keep us breathing, it's him. The ship angled toward the settlement below, descending through a thin veil of atmosphere that turned the view into a haze of dust and copper light. They settled on a landing pad in one of the rougher districts, far from the polished domes reserved for merchants or mining executives. Here, the air reeked of industrial lubricants and burning ore. The sky a permanent reddish haze from countless smelters. Eric powered down the engines and unstrapped himself, then turned to Tyra. From a storage compartment he pulled a rough brown cloak, pressing it into her hands. Put this on. Blue skin makes you stand out here. Too many eyes, too many ears. Tyra hesitated, then slipped it around her shoulders. The fabric was scratchy, heavy, but it did the job of muting her features. Still, she felt the sting of indignity. For years she had walked openly, proudly, as a diplomat. Now she hid like a fugitive. What's the plan? She asked quietly. Find Harlow, Eric replied, checking the charge on his sidearm before holstering it. Then figure out what to do with what we pulled from the consortium systems. And, he added, glancing at her, keep you alive. The last words struck her harder than she expected. She drew the cloak tighter and followed him down the ramp into the chaos of Nova Haven. The largest spaceport on Helios Minor. The streets were alive with motion. Miners in dust-stained overalls trudged past merchants hawking wares from makeshift stalls. The air buzzed with voices in a dozen languages, laughter from drunken workers spilling out of cantinas, the hiss of cargo haulers skimming overhead. Eric moved through it all with calm purpose, weaving between crowds, one hand always close to his weapon. Tyra stayed close, the crowd pressing too tightly, the stink of sweat and chemicals clogging her throat. Finally, they reached a nondescript building tucked between a weapons shop and a cheap lodging house. A faded sign above the door read Harlow's. Inside, the air smelled of engine grease and spiced liquor. A few patrons glanced up as they entered, but none lingered on them for long. Behind the counter stood a burly human with a cybernetic arm. and a scarred face, his gray eyes narrowing when they landed on Eric. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Eric Donovan. I figured you'd be bones in some gutter by now." "Not for lack of trying," Eric shot back with the ghost of a grin. "Need a word. Private." Harlow's eyes flicked to Tyra, still hooded. His gaze lingered, suspicious. Then he jerked his head toward a door at the back. "Office is open. Don't touch my good whiskey." The back room was cluttered, but meticulously ordered weapon parts laid out in neat rows. Datapads stacked on a side table, star charts pinned to the wall. Harlow dropped into the chair behind a battered desk while Eric closed the door. "Who's your friend?" Harlow asked bluntly. Eric motioned for Tyra to lower her hood. She did, reluctantly. Harlow let out a low whistle. "Lion, diplomatic breed, by the looks of you. You always did know how to complicate things, Donovan." Eric leaned against the wall, arms folded. Complication wasn't optional this time. Quickly he explained the lab, the breeding program, the escape, the stolen data. Tyra listened. As her ordeal became words spoken in Eric's steady voice, his tone stripped of panic or embellishment. Yet the truth was no less horrifying for its calm delivery. By the time he finished, Harlow's expression had grown grim. He tapped a calloused finger against his desk. "You've stepped into something worse than you realize. The consortium doesn't tolerate interference with projects like this. You and the girl? You're already worth more alive than dead." Tyra stiffened. "What do you mean?" Harlow leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "There's a bounty. 500,000 credits for Donovan. 1,000,000 for you, Lion. Alive only. Came through the unofficial channels about 6 hours ago. Whoever wants you back doesn't just want revenge. They want their specimen returned." Eric swore under his breath. "They moved faster than I expected." Harlow gave a humorless laugh. "They want her back badly. And they want whatever you stole even more." Eric pulled a secure data pouch from his belt and placed it on the desk. "Then let's see what exactly I have." Harlow plugged the pouch into a reader. A blue hologram shimmered into the air above the desk, lines of text and schematics scrolling rapidly. Tyra leaned forward, her stomach turning to ice. The files revealed the scope of the program. Multiple facilities across different systems, hundreds of captives, embryos already viable. Hybrid soldiers engineered from stolen genetics, lion adaptability, drawn strength, vexoid intelligence. Weapons born in wombs, not factories. Her voice shook when she spoke. "This is genocide." Eric's jaw tightened, his eyes reflecting cold fury. "They're trying to build an army." "Worse," Harlow added grimly, scrolling further. "They're close to success. First-generation hybrids already gestating." Tyra's hand covered her mouth. She wanted to scream, to deny it, but the proof glowed before her in sterile consortium reports. Then Harlow pointed to a section that made her blood run colder still. "Look here," he said. "Project stakeholders. Recognize any of these names?" Tyra's eyes flicked to the list and froze. Among the shadowed figures of corporate directors and consortium generals were familiar names. Names from her own astral council. Leaders she had once trusted, perhaps even admired. Her chest constricted, and she felt suddenly hollow. "My people," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Some of my own council are complicit." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the projector. Finally, Eric placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his voice low but resolute. "Then we exposed them all." Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering with unshed tears. He held her gaze steadily, and in that look, she felt the anchor she had been searching. For since her capture, something solid in a galaxy spinning apart. And deep inside her, despair gave way to something fiercer. Resolve. The safe house was little more than a prefab shell on the outskirts of Nova Haven, metal walls patched with scraps, a flickering lamp hanging from the ceiling, and a single narrow bed pressed against one corner. It was safe, Harlow insisted, hidden among rows of identical worker housing. For a time, it was enough. Eric secured the perimeter sensors himself, setting up motion alarms and checking every angle before finally allowing himself to breathe. Tyra sat on the battered couch, cloak still drawn tightly around her, staring at her hands. The images from the consortium files still burned in her mind embryos, cataloged like inventory. Cold reports on specimen viability, her people's names written in stakeholder logs. Her world had been diplomacy, negotiation, belief in unity. And now, unity had been turned into a weapon. Eric knelt beside her, setting a small medkit on the table. "Your wrists," he said gently. "Let me look." She offered them reluctantly. The bruises from the restraints were angry purple against her sapphire skin, cuts still weeping faint trails of blood. His hands were surprisingly careful, wrapping the wounds with practiced ease. He smelled faintly of oil and ozone, the scent of battlefields. She found it strangely grounding. "You've done this before?" she murmured. "Too many times," he admitted, securing the final bandage. "Patch yourself or patch a comrade. Either way, you learn quick." Silence hung between them for a moment, broken only by the faint hum of the lamp. Then Tyra whispered, "They were my people, my counsel. How can I face them knowing what they've done?" Eric's eyes hardened. "You don't carry their guilt, but you do carry the power to stop them. That's what matters." Before she could reply, the emergency communicator on the table beeped sharply. Eric grabbed it, thumbing it on. Harlow's voice came through, low and tense. "Consortium's moving fast. They've locked down the main spaceport. You'll never get out that way? Options?" Eric asked. "There's an auxiliary comm tower in Sector 7. A contact of mine named Ree can get you inside. She's got access to the deep space relay. If you get that data transmitted, every system in the sector will see it. Consortium won't be able to bury this." "And what about you?" Eric pressed. "I'll stall them as long as I can. Don't waste the time." Harlow's voice cut off in static. Eric clipped the communicator back to his belt. "That's it. We move now." Minutes later, they were winding through the narrow streets of Nova Haven, keeping to shadows and alleys. The city was on edge. Consortium patrols in black armor fanned out across plazas, scanning faces, questioning merchants. The air was thick with tension. Tyra pulled her hood lower, keeping her head down, while Eric guided her with steady touches. Never faltering, the comm tower loomed ahead, a slender spire jutting above the smoke-hazed skyline. Its upper levels bristled with dish arrays and antennae, the veins of communication that stretched across star systems. Waiting near its base was a woman with cropped black hair and the sharp eyes of a soldier. She wore plain miner's clothes, but her posture screamed military. "Ree?" Eric asked quietly. She nodded once. "Harlow sent you? You have the data?" Eric patted the secure pouch at his belt. "Right here." "Good. And let's move. We don't have much time." Ree led them to a service hatch, swiping a stolen access card. The door hissed open, and they slipped inside. The tower's innards were a maze of narrow stairwells and maintenance ladders, conduits humming faintly around them. They climbed in silence, the sound of their boots on metal drowned by the deep throb of machinery. Tyra's muscles ached, but she pushed herself harder, clinging to the thought of what waited at the top. Proof, exposure, a chance to burn the Consortium's lies into the open-air. At last they reached the broadcast suite, a chamber lined with consoles and glowing interfaces. Through a wide viewport, The sprawl of Nova Haven stretched below, consortium dropships already visible at the main port in the distance. "This is it," Ree said, sliding into the central console. She gestured sharply. "Give me the drive." Eric handed it over. Ree slotted the data into the system, and her fingers flew across the controls. "This will hit every channel. Military, civilian, commercial. They won't be able to contain it once it's live." A warning light began flashing angrily. Ree swore. "They're already tracing the access. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they're at our door." "Do it," Tyra urged, stepping closer. "Get it out there." The hum of the transmitter deepened, lights along the walls flickering as power diverted. Data streams began to unfurl across the screen's genetic diagrams, medical reports, lists of names, council signatures. The ugly truth of the consortium laid bare. Eric moved to the doorway, rifle raised, every muscle taut. His voice was steady, but the edge of iron was clear. "Then we hold this room for 5 minutes." The sound of boots on metal stairs rose from below. Harsh voices barked orders. The smell of ozone drifted upward as weapons powered on. Tyra's heart pounded, fear surging like fire in her veins. But she moved to Eric's side anyway, her hand gripping the small blaster he'd given her. He glanced at her, surprise flickering. For just a moment before he nodded once. Together, they faced the door as the alarms blared and shadows gathered on the stairwell below. The truth was almost free, the consortium nearly exposed. All they had to do was survive the next few minutes. The tower shook like a living thing, every beam and conduit vibrating under the thunder of approaching boots. The air tasted of ozone and hot metal, a sharp tang that clung to the back of Tira's throat. She crouched behind a steel console, fingers clenched tight around the blaster Eric had pressed into her hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a reminder that they were seconds from annihilation out at the door. Eric stood like a wall, rifle braced against his shoulder. He glanced at her once, eyes steady despite the chaos outside. "Stay low. Fire when you see them. Don't hesitate." Before she could reply, the doorframe lit up with searing plasma bolts, carving glowing scars into the metal. Smoke filled the room as the first wave of consortium agents surged forward, armored figures, faces hidden behind mirrored visors, weapons raised. Eric's rifle roared. Each shot was precise, deadly, dropping the first 2 agents before they could clear the doorway. Tyra flinched at the noise, then forced herself to act. She leaned out, squeezed the trigger. A bolt of energy hissed across the corridor, striking an agent square in the chest. He staggered back, armor sizzling, her breath caught in shock. She had actually hit him. "Nice shot," Eric barked, sliding to a new angle as return fire scorched the walls. "Keep them off me." Ree's voice cut through the chaos from behind the consoles. "Transmission at 20%. Hold them." More agents stormed the stairwell, their weapons spitting light. The room shook with the onslaught. Eric ducked, rolled, and came up firing, his movements a blur of trained efficiency. Tyra matched him as best she could, her blaster flashing. Each shot fueled by terror, and the stubborn refusal to be dragged back into Chain's dot. But then the sound changed. A new whine rose from below, deeper, heavier. Eric's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "They're charging a disruptor." Tyra froze. "What's that?" "A neural weapon," Eric growled, swapping power cells in his rifle. "Fires a pulse. That fries every nervous system in its radius. Us, them, doesn't matter. They'll kill everyone in this tower to stop the broadcast." Ree's hands flew over the controls. 50%. "I need 4 more minutes." Another blast rocked the doorframe, showering them with sparks. Eric's gaze darted across the room, landing on a side panel with thick conduits running into the floor. He cursed under his breath, then sprinted for it, ignoring the plasma bolts, scorching the walls around him. "Cover me," he shouted. Tyra obeyed without thinking, firing into the smoke-choked corridor as Eric tore open the panel. Inside, coils of wire and massive capacitors thrummed with stored energy. His hands moved with reckless precision, yanking, splicing, rerouting. "What are you doing?" Tyra cried, turning their weapon back on them. His teeth bared in a grim smile. "Tower this size has to have lightning protection. Means it can absorb, can redirect a surge. If I link it right, when they fire the disruptor," the thought finished itself in her mind, "it'll blow back on them." "That's the plan," he said, sweat beading on his brow. Ree's voice rose, sharp and desperate. 80%. The whine outside peaked, a sound that made Tyra's skin crawl, every nerve screaming in anticipation of destruction. Eric slammed the last connection into place, sparks arcing across his gloves. "Get down!" The disruptor fired. Light consumed the world, a white-hot flash that seared the air. Tyra ducked behind the console, heart in her throat. The surge tore through the tower, but instead of frying them, Eric's jury-rigged system caught the energy and hurled it back down the conduit's dot. The result was instant. The base of the tower exploded in a chain of detonations, the shockwave rattling every floor. Outside the viewport, Tyra saw consortium soldiers scattering, weapons and bodies hurled. Aside as fire blossomed, Ree's triumphant cry rose over the chaos. "Transmission complete. It's out. Every system has it." Eric staggered back from the panel, smoke curling from his gloves. His face was streaked with blood from a grazing wound, but his grin was fierce. "That's it. The galaxy knows." "Aye." New alarm shrieked through the tower, different from the rest. Ree's face went pale as she read the console. "They're bringing ships down. Orbital blockade. If we don't move now, we're trapped." Eric grabbed Tyra's arm, pulling her toward the maintenance shaft. "Roof. Emergency shuttle. Go." They climbed, lungs burning, the tower groaning beneath them from the damage. At the roof, the wind tore at them, carrying the echoes of chaos. From below, the shuttle sat waiting, engines whining in standby. But Ree stopped at the hatch, shaking her head. "I can't go. This is my home. Harlow's still down there, and the miners will need someone to fight back." Tyra caught her hand. "You'll be killed," Ree smiled grimly. "Maybe, but at least now we have a chance." She pressed a data chip into Eric's palm. "Coordinates to a resistance outpost. They'll get you to Lion Space." Eric held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "Tell Harlow he's still. Owes me a drink." Ree gave a sharp grin, then turned back into the tower. Moments later, Eric and Tyra strapped into the shuttle. Engines roared, the craft shuddering as Eric wrenched the controls. They blasted upward, the city shrinking below. Consortium ships, angling in pursuit. Energy blasts lit the sky, one grazing their shields and rocking the shuttle. Tyra gripped the co-pilot's seat, her voice trembling. "Will we make it?" Eric's jaw tightened, eyes locked on the stars ahead. "We don't have another option." The shuttle screamed through the atmosphere, enemy ships closing fast. The nav computer beeped as they reached the coordinates. Eric pulled the lever, and once again the stars stretched into brilliant lines. They were gone. Only when the cabin settled into hyperspace's eerie calm did Tyra realize she was shaking. Eric's hand found hers across the console, rough and warm. "It's out there now. The truth. They can't hide it anymore." Her sapphire eyes met his, weary but burning with new fire. "Then the real fight begins." And for the first time, she believed it.